What's up, everybody? And welcome in. I'm in Washington, D.C. for spring break, showing my kids and my wife who have never been here all the sights. I ran into a tree wearing this earlier today and had a little snag, but that's okay. We're still making it. It's like freezing, literally freezing outside, but it's been fun to walk, and the weather's supposed to get nicer tomorrow for the next couple days here, so it's going to be fun. We were able to watch and listen to a lot of the James Crumbley trial today. But it's about 4:15 and I've got to do the video now because we're going out to dinner tonight and doing a bunch of stuff tonight. So I wasn't going to be able to go live, but I figured I'd give you a recap, especially for one of the more interesting witnesses today we're going to focus on, which was the mental wellness person at the school. He's not a trained professional in mental health treatment, but he is there to talk to the kids about their social and emotional issues, like the school counselor. So we're going to focus a lot on his testimony today to try to figure out exactly what the school knew, what they could have done, what they should have done, especially if James Crumbley is going to point the finger at the fact that all these other people talked to Ethan Crumbley. All these other people knew about what was going on. None of them thought anything was wrong. We're going to also hear from the dean of students who spent a lot of time with him, and then a little bit from the officer in charge on the case. Not a ton from him because we've talked about a lot of his testimony before on Jennifer Crumbley's case, but we didn't focus on these two too much during her case. And I think it's important, the dean of students and the counselor, the school counselor, because they have specific training. They've talked to Ethan Crumbley. They've talked to a lot of other kids going through things. So I think it is interesting to get their perspective and see exactly what they thought was going on and what they thought was foreseeable. So we're going to focus a lot on their testimony today. This first guy basically talks about how his background and, experience and caring for the students' social and emotional issues. A lot of it's on an as-needed basis. So we're going to pull it up here with our first clip to discuss one thing I thought the prosecutor pushed on, and some just really inappropriate conversations between the lawyers in front of the jury that I wish wouldn't happen. And I'm going to explain why. If some people think I'm being hard on one lawyer or the other, I'm going to explain why in this clip. All right, here we go.
At least four.
Sir, are you familiar with the term suicidal ideation?
Yes, I am familiar with that term.
Could you please explain to us what that means?
Suicidal ideation
I'm
is...
going to object to relevance.
Judge, I believe this witness will testify that he indicated that the defendant's son was expressing signs of suicidal ideation that was expressed to the defendant.
So before he even answers, does he know what suicidal ideation is? He asks him to define it. He says that the son expressed it and that the son expressed it to the defendant. So he's testifying, he's adding all this up, he's putting all this together for the jury in front of the jury before he has even answered whether or not he knows what it is. And so if the judge were to sustain this objection, which I don't think she does, I think she allows it, but if she were to sustain this objection, he has already testified in front of the jury exactly the testimony he wanted to get out from this witness. That's not what these objections are and responses are supposed to be for. She's supposed to say objection, relevance, or outside the scope of his knowledge or foundation or something like that. And he can respond with, he does know, judge, or it is relevant, judge. And if they need more argument, they come up to the sidebar and they argue it. That actually happened today because the defense attorney was getting frustrated at one of their back and forth speaking objections. But again, he says it all out loud before he can even answer it. We are going to listen to the answer together.
This is really the time, right? So I'm going to allow it.
What's suicidal ideation?
Suicidal ideation is looking at themes, ideas, behaviors which could be associated with suicide. So when you take sadness, depression, anxiety, those on their own aren't necessarily suicidal. And when we look at them, we may see somebody who's not actively suicidal, that may not be expressing a date or a plan or a method, but we see themes that if left unchecked could be associated with potentially becoming suicidal.
Okay. Now, as your role as a counselor at Oxford High School, as you dealt with students who were expressing suicidal ideation, separate from those who actually attempted suicide?
Yes.
Could you put a number on how many?
Dozens.
Now, you mentioned that there were 4 counselors for a school.
So he knows what it is. He's dealt with other students. And he thought the defendant was exhibiting this basically. So that's a good background as we continue in our conversation with what he did. We're going to jump ahead a little bit about some of the comments that Ethan Crumbley made and how he explained them to this counselor and other people and why they basically thought it wasn't as big of a deal as it could have been.
And son would be September 2021.
I did not actually have an interaction with the defendant's son. I received information about the defendant's son.
Okay, I'm showing you Exhibit 199. This is an email from a different teacher to you, September 8th, 2021.
Yes.
Okay. And why don't you go ahead and read the email here that you received?
Hi, Sean. Could you please touch base with student? In his autobiography poem, he said that he feels terrible and that his family is a mistake. Unusual responses for sure.
Okay, that is September the 8th, 2021. Do you recall any interaction with the defendant's son at that point?
I do not.
Okay. Now, do you recall any meetings, check-ins, or phone calls from September to November of 2008 or 2021?
No. So to give context on this, what I did was have a conversation with the teacher to gain a little more context of what was meant by the email. And then the teacher filled me in that the student was actually joking with others in the class and that it was not at the level of concern that she had believed when she said it.
Okay,
So I don't know if that means he was joking about the comments about his family or just that he was exhibiting that he was fine and joking with other students in the class. But if he was joking about the negative depression seeming things when talking about his family being terrible in his, biography, that would line up with the Crumbley parents saying he was joking about other things that seemed serious or could be indicators. So I thought that was an interesting little point there. And let's continue to hear if he ever even told the Crumbley parents about this.
Okay, so if I'm correct, then you received the email, then you made contact with the teacher who sent you the email?
Yes.
Okay, and then the determination was made that no further involvement was required.
Correct.
Okay. I'm going to show you this is your response. Thanks for the heads up. I'm in senior meetings throughout the day, but we'll try and catch up with him. That was the same teacher, September 8th, 2021, 9:15.
Yes, that is correct.
This is People's Exhibit 200. This is November the 10th, 2021. The same teacher emailed you. Hi, Sean. The defendant's son is having a rough time right now. He might need to speak with you. Do you recall that email?
I do.
Okay. And tell us what you did when you received that email.
I checked in with the student in the hallway in between classes to just let them know that if they were having a hard time, that I was available to talk to.
And
to me, there's only so much you can do, right, as the school counselor. But I do feel like sometimes hindsight, and that was part of the cross-examination by the defense attorney, you try to act like, oh, everybody else was so bad, but I did everything great. And I took enough time and I did all the things I was supposed to do. But it's like a check-in in the hallway after multiple emails showing concern. Maybe they should have done more. Or this stuff really wasn't concerning. I don't think it can be both ways. I don't think this should be like, these are major red flags. Even the parents should have known that because he was exhibiting this stuff at school, they definitely should have stepped in. It's like, yeah, but nobody really thought, even the people with more knowledge or different knowledge, right? The parents knew some stuff the school didn't. And now we're finding out the school knew some stuff the parents didn't, right? Because he's going to say, I didn't tell the parents about this stuff. I just talked to the student in the hallway and said he could talk to me if he needed it.
here's your response at 4:44 p.m. I'm sorry, I was in a meeting through the end of the day. I'll catch up with them.
Yeah.
So you recall that interaction with the defendant's son?
Yes.
Okay, tell us about that, please.
It was in between classes. I believe the morning after I had responded to this email. And I just spoke to him briefly in passing to let him know that if he needed to talk for any reason, that I would make myself available for him.
Okay. Did you make a decision to contact a parent at that point?
I did not.
Okay. You did not contact a parent?
I did not contact a parent.
And tell us why, please.
Because I wanted to gain any information from the student and allow the student the opportunity to talk. Being sad isn't unusual. But if I had no information other than the student is sad, it's not something I would call a parent over.
So from my perspective, we could see that either way. If this was another kid and nothing ever ended up happening, fine. But when this happened, you can look back and say, maybe you should have contacted the parents. Maybe you should have told them he was sad. That's exactly what we're doing to the Crumbley parents, is we're looking back at everything and now we're taking it a lot more seriously and wishing that they would have taken it more seriously at the time. And maybe if the Crumbley parents had this additional context, then maybe they would have done something, right? If they knew that there were multiple things that teachers and counselors had seen and discussed with Ethan to make them concerned. I do think that's an issue. Talk about the bullet stuff with the mom that we already dug into more in Jennifer's case. There was another situation where Ethan Crumbley was watching somebody, shooting, but he said it was from a video game. It wasn't anything real. It wasn't anything really to concern themselves about. Once again, other things that they kind of just didn't do anything about, which again, in hindsight, looks a lot worse than it probably did at the time. And that's kind of the point of the defense in this case is when we look back, it all looks bad now, but at the time, nobody was really concerned. He talked about how when they came in to discuss the math assignment that he drew the pictures on of the gun and somebody, shot, that he had prepared 3 pages of mental health resources for them that he hoped that they'd use. And then he discussed, what he told them versus what they did as far as taking him home for that day. So we're going to jump ahead a little bit to that.
We just spend time with you where we are with you.
To take him out of school.
And probably if it was accepted, if they worked without.
Sorry, I'm backing up.
Going to try and get dad to.
It was after he created this. Exhibit 130.
Yes, it existed in its form as Exhibit 130 prior to the edits that I had seen on the paper.
Now, at some point, did both James and Jennifer Crumbley come to your office?
Yeah, so I ended up being on the phone with mom for that 5 to 6 minutes. She stated she was going to try and get dad to come to the office and she was unable to. And so during that point, we had about 20 minutes where I was sort of just waiting. During that time, I showed the student the list of resources I was going to give to his parents.
Tell me about that, please.
It was about a 3-page list of just different mental health services in the area. On it, it gave contact information for them. It gave specialization areas for them. And it gave oftentimes insurance, if it was accepted, if they worked without insurance, anything that they would work with payment plans.
Okay.
So I wanted him to see what I would be providing his parents.
Was the defendant's son with you from the point that you brought him out of class to the point that James and Jennifer Crumbley arrived at school?
Yes.
Okay. And approximately how long was that?
It was approximately an hour and a half. So around, I want to say.
So he was with him an hour and a half that day and still made the decision to send him back into class with all the students. And I'm not blaming this guy at all. I'm not blaming this guy. I'm just saying, let's keep the wheels turning about what was actually foreseeable. Who could have foreseen this and why? And we'll talk about what he knew and what he didn't know here in a second.
A little before 10, probably like 9:45, 9:50, I received another call from mom stating that she was unable to get a hold of dad and that she would be coming in.
Okay. Now, if I told you that we saw surveillance video that indicated you welcomed them, both James and Jennifer, in your office at 10:40 a.m., does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Now, what was your expectations of what was to happen at the end of that meeting?
My hope was that they were going to take him and either take him to get help or even just to take him to let's have a good day. Let's have a day where we just spend time with you, where we are with you.
To take him out of school?
Yeah.
That's what he was hoping for. But in cross, we'll hear him say that he was making certain plans in his head that he didn't necessarily tell the parents. And again, I think hindsight plays into this guy's testimony a ton, which I don't blame him for. I probably would do the same.
Did you believe that he could be left alone at that point?
I didn't want him left alone. I didn't want to make that decision that he was okay to be left alone. So that's why I stayed with him for as long as I did until I had parents there.
Did you express to the student or his parents that you identified suicidal ideation?
Yes, I said that the student, when I asked the student if he had a plan, if he was a threat to himself or others, the student said, his words were something to the effect of, I can see why this looks bad. I'm not going to do anything. So I had all this information, but the student was saying he wasn't going to be doing anything.
And it seems like you believed him, which I don't blame you for believing him.
So when the parents came in, I went over all of the things I had seen over my time with the student. That he expressed the sadness over a dog passing. He expressed that COVID has been hard, that a family member passed, that a friend left. He expressed an argument the night before with parents.
Did he tell you details about the argument? No. Did he tell you that he received a gun a few days ago?
No.
So this is the information he didn't have that the parents didn't share with him. And the prosecutor points that out, that with all the information, things probably would have been different.
Tell us about the meeting when James and Jennifer arrived.
It was initially odd to me that they were both there because I wasn't expecting that. But not to the point where I asked anything about it, just it was unexpected. Both parents followed me back to my office. The student, that was the one time he was in there by himself, was when I went out to greet the parents and brought them back. The student and his dad sat across from me, and mom sat in a chair kind of diagonal from me. And Mr. Ejak had left once we had confirmed parents were coming, and he returned for that portion of the meeting. So really, I felt like parents were confirming what I had said without giving additional information.
Hang on, let me ask you about that. You say confirming without giving additional information. I want to make sure I understand what you mean by that. So first of all, you've had these kind of meetings with parents in the past?
I have.
Okay. When you say confirming, is that something that would typically happen in these meetings?
It could, but oftentimes you may gain additional information. As you know, as a school employee, I had 90 minutes.
Okay.
He's 15 years old.
So did James or Jennifer give you any additional?
So again, he's intimating that they have him all day, every day, his whole life, and he only had him for 90 minutes.
Information?
No.
So tell me what you did and what was that?
So to start off the meeting, I asked mom if she had received the phone call from the previous day and that those events were true. She said yes. I talked about how the student had expressed these different areas of sadness, that his dog had passed, yes. Family member had passed, yep. Friends left. And all of those were just confirmed.
Is there any details about the circumstances of the friend leaving and the impact on her son?
I didn't know any details about it.
They didn't share any with you?
No.
I'm sorry, I interrupted again. Go ahead.
Okay. So a lot of it was, I felt like I was bringing information and they knew it, but I wasn't gaining information. So at that point, I know I handed mom the list of resources and said I'd like him to get support outside of here. I'd like him to get help and have somebody that he can talk to. And mom made mention that they would, but they couldn't right away. So I told mom that I wanted him to get help as soon as possible, today if possible, and was told that wasn't possible.
Okay, told by James, Jennifer, or both?
By Jennifer.
Okay.
James at that time, to my memory, was talking with his son.
Do you recall what he said?
I remember it, yes. He was looking at the math assignment with his son.
You say math assignment, we're talking about
It's
this one?
the hard copy.
So we're referring to this, Exhibit 128?
Yes.
Okay.
And he was talking to his son and mentioned that, you know, you have people you can talk to. You can talk to your counselor, you have your journal, we talk.
So a couple things there. Number one, a little wishy-washy on whether or not they had to do it right then that day. But when we talked about whether or not he actually said it had to be done that day, he ends up spreading it to as long as within 48 hours, or he might call Child Protective Services, and that Jennifer Crumbley's the one that confirmed it couldn't happen today because of work, which is why the state's focusing so much on the dad driving for, DoorDash or whatever. He clearly could have stopped that and taken him home. But he did say that James Crumbley was focusing on Ethan, talking about Ethan, and later another witness is going to confirm that he showed appropriate care when talking to Ethan. And he said, you have people you can talk to, your counselor, your journal, and me. I mean, those seem like reasonably appropriate responses. And also, to me, pretty clear, these parents didn't think he was going to go do anything. Neither did the counselor, neither did the dean of students, who we're going to hear from next. And
it felt appropriate at that time, but
at that point, did he share any details about anything you had discussed?
I don't recall any additional details, no. But my concern at that point was that there wasn't any action happening.
When his wife said that they can't, did he protest that?
No.
So you said you had concern that no action was happening. So what did you decide to do?
Well, I told them that with getting help, I said I wanted to see movement on within 48 hours, and then I'd be following up.
So if the shooting didn't occur, what was your plan?
I was going to meet with the student the next morning and see if they had conversations about it, if they had made some plans to move towards some sort of therapy.
And if that didn't occur, what were you going to do?
I was going to call Child Protective Services.
Now, generally speaking, within Oxford High School, is it preferred to send the student home when an issue arises, or keep the student at school?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean with that.
So you didn't call the police?
As a counselor, I can't send a student home anyway.
But you didn't want him to be alone?
I didn't want him to be alone. So in this context, my thought was when parents were saying they had to return to work, I wanted to make sure the student was with people because my concern was his well-being and his ability to be safe and cared for.
Did James Crumbley elaborate at all on?
So
the
clearly he did not think it was foreseeable that he was going to do anything even after all of this and all the pictures. Now, the state's whole argument is he didn't know the parents just bought him a firearm. And that's what the defense is going to have to deal with. And the decision the jury is going to have to make is that added piece of information. Does that flip it from everybody who didn't think it was foreseeable to the parents should absolutely find this foreseeable?
fight they had the night before?
No.
Now, how long did the tell us how the meeting ended?
Jennifer asked if they were done, which felt abrupt. And during that time, the student had also expressed interest. He wanted to go back to class. I asked Mr. Ejak if there was any, like from a discipline standpoint, is there anything you need to do? Is there any reason he can't go to class? And I was told no. So I wrote him a pass to return to his end of his third hour.
Okay. And Jennifer asked, "Are we done here?" Did James protest at all?
No.
And then he basically told him, I care about you, but the parents did not. Then we get to cross-examination. She confirms a lot of what we've already talked about, how he didn't call the parents about past issues. It's common in the area, gun culture, shooting, target practice, shooting range, hunting in this area. While they were waiting, Ethan was doing homework and they were watching videos because he wanted to make video games when he grew up or whatever, or got after school, which again does not indicate what he's about to do. If he's doing stuff that's due tomorrow and talking about his job in the future, knowing what he's going to do, that none of that's going to matter, that doesn't really give you that indication as an adult, I would think, which is just showing the nuance and how this stuff is difficult. That's all I'm trying to do there. Not to say there's any excuse or anything. We'll listen to a little bit more here.
Yes.
There was a second chair in front of your desk.
Yes.
Mr. Crumbley sat in the second chair next to his son.
Yes.
And then Mrs. Crumbley sat in a third chair that was available in was it behind Mr. Crumbley a little bit?
So there were two across from my desk, and then there was one that was kind of off on a corner.
Really small.
Yes.
And Mr. Ejak would have been kind of off to your right. Is that you were talking with Mrs. Crumbley that you recall Mr. Crumbley was interacting with his son?
I do.
You said that Mr. Crumbley looked at the math assignment, the modified math assignment, because that's the one that you had, that he looked at the modified math assignment with his son.
That is correct.
They looked at it together and that he showed concern for his son.
Yeah, it felt like he was interacting with his son and that he mentioned some things that were available for his son.
And we'll talk about that in just a minute. You felt that Mr. Crumbley's interactions with his son, that he was showing the appropriate level of care and caring for him at that point in your office.
Yes, on a surface level, yes.
You confirmed that Mr. Crumbley's son had gone to the shooting range the weekend before.
I did.
You confirmed that he had those losses. He lost a family member, his family dog, and a friend had moved away, that he experienced it.
They confirmed that they're.
Told you about not liking virtual school.
Yes.
You told Mr. Crumbley and his wife that, well, let me back up a little bit. You told the prosecutor that your hope was that Mr. Crumbley and his wife would take their son out of school, either get him to see someone to talk to, or to go have a really fun day.
My words to them were I'd like him to get help as soon as possible, today if possible.
And so you expressed to them that you wanted him to get help as soon as possible, today if possible.
Yes.
And Mrs. Crumbley said, we can't do today, we have to go back to work.
Yes.
They assured you, though, or at least you felt assured, that they were going to get him help.
They were not against it, and they made it seem as if it would be something that they would be willing to do.
Okay. So you handed these 3 sheets of paper to one of them. They didn't toss it in the garbage, right?
Not from me, no.
Right. They didn't scoff.
What this defense attorney is developing to me is that they were going to get him help in the next 48 hours. So was the duty to get him help and take him home right then and there? Or alternatively, to go check the house to see if the gun was there right after you saw this picture? Is that the actual duty? Because it seemed like they wanted to get him help. They cared about him. They went to the school. They had the meeting. The only thing they didn't do was take him out of school immediately, which they weren't forced to do by the school. And James Crumbley did not go back to his house to check if the gun was there.
Scoff about it and say, we're not doing this.
They took the paper.
Right. So you had no reason to believe that they weren't going to get their help either at some point, get their son help either some point that day or as soon as possible.
Based on the conversation, no, but that's also why I planned the follow-up meeting with the student the next day, was to ensure that there was some movement.
And you planned the follow-up meeting kind of in and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but you kind of planned that in your head, like this is my next step.
Yes.
Okay. You didn't express that during the meeting.
No.
In the meeting, you expressed that you were
There
going
was
to follow
stuff happening in his head that he wasn't actually saying, which again, the defense attorney is trying to prove that with the shooter as well. That stuff was happening in his head. He was telling his friend, he was writing it in a journal, but he wasn't actually expressing that to his parents. And she's showing a lot of parallels with some of these witnesses that people do act like this every day.
Follow up in about 48 hours.
Well, because when mom said that today wasn't an option, I said 48 hours then, I'll be following up.
Okay. So in your mind, you had some kind of timing that you were going to follow up to make sure that things were being followed through on. Obviously, we know that first check-in point didn't come. But you told them within 48 hours you wanted something done by the next morning. And based on your meeting, you didn't have any reason to think that Mr. Crumbley or his wife were not going to follow up.
I would agree.
Essentially, you wanted to ensure, and I believe you expressed this to Mr. Crumbley and his wife, wanted to ensure that their son's situation and his sadness didn't get worse.
Right. I wanted to ensure that we had something that, if left unchecked, could get worse.
Right. So sitting in the meeting, you weren't concerned necessarily that day, or even by the next morning, that their son was going to harm himself.
Based on what he had told me, I did not believe him to be actively harming himself. No.
Or anyone else.
Based on what he had told me, no.
So there's the big answer for this witness. Based on everything he knew at that time, he did not think he was going to harm himself or anyone else immediately that day. It was not foreseeable. Now, she goes through and she focuses on all the stuff he did know about the friend and about the picture and about the, suicidal ideology and about the sadness and about all that stuff. And then on redirect, the prosecutor goes through all the stuff he didn't know. And once again, he, opens it up with a statement that he shouldn't. We're going to listen to that very similar redirect on the next witness, which was the dean of students. But there was a lot of repetition, but I wanted to jump to something that a lot of people talked about, which is why didn't this guy search Ethan Crumbley's backpack? So let's jump to that here real quick.
At any point were you informed about the defendant's son's access to weapons?
I was not. No.
Were you given details
From somebody, oftentimes kids will.
about the drawing?
Yes.
Okay. Now he just testified, so I don't need you to go through everything he said, but do you recall if James Crumbley said anything?
During the meeting?
Yes.
He did. He expressed concern for his son, that he knew, or he reminded his son that he could always speak to him about stuff and that he had a journal that he could write stuff in if he was feeling frustrated or going through something.
Now, as a dean of students, when are you permitted to search students' personal belongings?
So when I have a reasonable suspicion that the student might have something illegal or something that's not allowed at school, and so there needs to be some sort of signed report from somebody. Oftentimes kids will be seen with it or they'll be showing whatever the things are that they brought to school they're not supposed to. There needs to be some type of a suspicion or alert that I have that will allow me to do that. And so in this situation, there wasn't something that alerted me that indicated I needed to.
Okay, then why not?
So all the stuff that he knew, the picture where he drew a gun, somebody shot on the floor, depression stuff, all that stuff that he knew, what did not rise to the level in his mind of reasonable suspicion. If I was the defense attorney, I may ask some law enforcement officers to define reasonable suspicion and what situations they'd use it in, because it's just a reasonable person would suspect something. It's an even lower bar than foreseeability in the criminal involuntary manslaughter that James Crumbley is charged with. Now, the prosecutor is going to follow up. Did you know that he had just gotten a firearm 4 days before? The answer is no. So maybe with that added information, maybe that would have been a reasonable suspicion. But in my opinion, it would not have been. Just because this kid owned a firearm wouldn't have changed kind of what your suspicion was from his perspective as the dean of students. Maybe they would say it would, but I really don't think it would. Because then you would have to say, does your dad have firearms? Are they locked? You'd have to ask every kid that in order to add it to the equation to make it a reasonable suspicion to search his backpack. So if he, as a reasonable person, did not suspect anything from happening, the defense, I would hammer on that. All of these people, was not foreseeable to any of these people. All of them could have done one thing differently. If they would have kicked him out, if they would have forced him to go home, if they would have searched his backpack, if they would have done this, that, or the other. And we all know, unfortunately, that cops and deans of students can say, oh, I had a reasonable suspicion because he drew this on the piece of paper. And how do you really argue with, is that a reasonable suspicion or not? And you have a lower expectation of privacy in a school, especially a public school, than you do elsewhere. So I don't really think that would have been a big argument, but he decided not to. And if he would have, maybe things would have changed, but that's not how the world works. It has to be foreseeable.
Nothing that he said, nothing that he, none of the behavior that he exhibited when I returned with his bag indicated that. There wasn't any suspicion that I had at the time that allowed me to believe to do that.
At any point were you informed about the defendant's son's access to weapons?
I was not.
Were you given details by the danger Jennifer Crumbley about the words and drawings on this exhibit?
I was not.
Thank you. That's the
So additionally, did you ask, right? If that was something you were suspecting, did you ask about that kind of access? That's a question I would ask.
After meeting with Mr. Crumbley and his wife, you felt that they were receptive of getting their son help, as was suggested by Mr. Hopkins.
Yes.
You and Sean Hopkins did not insist that it be done that day. Now, I'm going to clarify because I know that Mr. Hopkins indicated that he preferred that it would be done that day, but neither of you said, you need to take him today and you need to go get him help right now. And if you don't, there's going to be a problem.
What Mr. Hopkins had stated was that they needed to find him some counseling as soon as possible that day, if possible.
And if
He
you
would be following up within 48 hours to ensure there was something secure.
You just basically confirm that, and then again confirm James Crumbley showed the appropriate level of care. But I've got to jump ahead. I don't have a ton of time left here. Jump ahead about 6 minutes from there.
Good idea that that's who it was.
Okay. Even looking back, after you know what Mr. Crumbley's son did 2 hours after that meeting, his behaviors did not show a pattern of what he was planning to do 2 hours later.
Based on the information I knew, no.
It's fair to say that you have years of experience with at-risk students.
Yes, that's correct.
Years of experience with behavioral, academic, attendance issues of that nature.
Yes.
You have education and training about concerning things to look for in students.
Yes.
You knew that Mr. Crumbley.
Which James Crumbley does not. The Crumbley parents do not. They have a lot more time, a lot more information with Ethan. I agree, but this is a defense attorney's job. Build this witness up as to he knows it all when it comes to kids and when it comes to at-risk and depression. And also, he's got years of experience. He's hired at the top level at schools to deal with this exact issue, and even he didn't see it coming. It wasn't foreseeable to him.
Crumbley's son was looking at bullets on his phone on November 29th of 2021.
Yes.
You knew that he had drawn a gun and some concerning words on his math assignment.
Yeah, that's correct.
You knew that he was at the shooting.
This is all the stuff that he knew. And even knowing all this stuff, he knew he had access to guns because he was at a shooting range, right? At least some point, I guess they could have rented one at the shooting range, but even knowing all this, it still wasn't foreseeable to this guy. Now, to be fair, we're going to play the beginning of redirect as well from the prosecutor. After the defense attorney goes through all the stuff he did know, the prosecutor goes through all the stuff he didn't know, and the jury's going to have to determine the foreseeability.
You knew that Mr. Crumbley's son was looking at bullets on his phone on November 29th of 2021.
Yes.
You knew that he had drawn a gun and some concerning words on his math assignment.
Yeah, that's correct.
You knew that he was at the shooting range with his mom the weekend before.
Yes, that's correct.
You confirmed that during the meeting with his parents, correct?
Yes.
You knew that he had experienced significant losses in the months before November 30th of 2021.
Yes,
You knew that Mr. Hopkins was recommending that his parents have him talk to a therapist that day if possible.
that's correct.
You knew that his backpack was heavy and commented about the weight of it to a teacher.
That's correct.
You knew that firearms were not uncommon in homes in Oxford.
That's correct.
You knew that students at the high school handled firearms and that it wasn't uncommon.
We're casting answer numbers.
You knew-
Yeah, answer that.
You knew that the shooter was going to stay in school that day.
At the end of the meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Partly because he wanted to,
Yes.
and partly because his parents had to go to work.
That's what I was told. Yes.
And with all of this, all of the knowledge that you had on November 30th of 2021 at approximately 10:52 a.m., you did not feel that he was a threat to anyone, and you didn't feel that you had reasonable suspicion to look in his backpack.
No, because you have to remember, I knew very little of what we all know today. So when we're looking at the big picture today, I knew a fraction of what we all know now.
And we talked about this a little bit with Mr. Hopkins as well. We all know what happened at 12:51 on November 30th of 2021. But the information that you had at 10:52 a.m. or approximately 10:50 a.m. when that meeting ended is the information that you were going on.
Yes, and that does not rise to the level of suspension or of discipline, especially when you're considering mental health.
And it doesn't.
That supersedes any type of minor discipline or behavior violation.
So, and Mr. Hopkins talked about this a little bit. Looking in hindsight, there was more information.
Yes, we now know there's a lot more information.
You might look at things differently looking in hindsight.
I would 100% look at things differently.
But the information that you had on that day, at that time, is what led you to make the decisions that you made and feel the way that you felt about the situation that you were presented with in Mr. Hopkins' office.
That's a fair statement, yes.
No further questions.
Thank you.
I mean, that's a great cross and it's a great ending. I get it. People in the chat, I'm sure, are saying the parents knew more. The parents should have done more. It's not on the school to do this stuff. I get it. But these people are trained professionals and they knew about drawings of guns and bullets and watching certain videos that were, dangerous in nature and depressive thoughts, indications of suicidal thoughts. They knew all of that. And they didn't send him home. They didn't do anything that could have stopped this shooting in hindsight. And now that we look back, of course, everybody would have done things differently. But I thought that was as good as you can do with this witness, right? It's as good as you can do, in my opinion. But now let's listen to the beginning of redirect, which he frustratingly starts with a statement that I would object to every time and say, Judge, he cannot set up his questions. He can't testify that now this witness is going to put it all together for us and then start answering questions, which is what he does now. And he says, now let's talk about everything they didn't know. That's closing argument. That's not something you do in redirect or direct.
Briefly, Mr. Ejak, let's talk about the information not shared with you at 10:52 a.m. on November 30th, 2021. Okay, so you formed your belief that you did not have the requisite level of suspicion to search the shooter's backpack based upon what you were told. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. Did James Crumbley tell you that he had bought his son a 6-hour 9mm firearm 4 days before that meeting?
He did not.
Okay. Did anybody, either his son or his wife, tell you that?
No.
Did his son tell you that, or did James Crumbley tell you that his son had been begging for a 9mm handgun?
No.
Did James Crumbley tell you that he actually got him a different firearm in June of 2021?
No.
Did James Crumbley tell you that the details and severity of his son's friend being taken from him at the beginning of the month?
No.
Now, you indicated that as far as a discipline standpoint, your belief was that the mental health concerns would override.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
So when you have a student who is being
So basic, because they did know, I don't know if this person didn't know, but the people at the school did know about the issues with the friend, but at least to some level, they didn't like get really into it. But so the big ticket item is if they would have known that his parents bought him a firearm for Facebook or for Christmas, which was on Facebook and public knowledge that the school could have known, I guess, that seems to be the linchpin. Is that enough to make it not foreseeable for anybody else, but foreseeable for the parents? You guys tell me. You tell me in the comments what you think, because this is really interesting to me to hear the school's testimony come out this way. And these trained professionals did not see it coming, were surprised when it was Ethan Crumbley, didn't automatically think of him when they heard there was a school shooting, even after having this meeting just a couple hours before.
seen for mental health, and there also are some minor violations. This being the second day of insubordination, essentially, the mental health concern is what takes precedence because you want to build that relationship with the student and let them know that it's a safe space, and you don't want to follow it up with some kind of a negative interaction, such as a discipline.
Is that one of the reasons why Mr. Hopkins led the meeting?
Yes.
Did your lens ever change from mental health to discipline?
It never did. No.
Is that based upon?
So that's really interesting to me. And I do have to take off. I think I'm already 5 minutes late here, but really interesting on what did the school know specifically and comparing foreseeability and what they did versus what the parents did. And not to say the school is criminally liable. They're definitely civilly liable in my opinion, but where do we draw the line as to duty of what parents should know about their teenagers? Horrible. Obviously, Ethan Crumbley was manipulative, sadistic, trying to do this, trying to set this up, trying to do it in a way to trick all these adults so they couldn't save these poor kids. But where was the line for his parents, and did they cross it? What do you guys think now that we've heard from the school officials? It's interesting as we continue to piece this trial together, and we'll continue working towards the ends of it to see exactly what happens. Obviously, we know what happened to Jennifer Crumbley, but let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to hit that like button. And until next time, I don't know when it's going to be, when I'll have time on this spring break to pop in for another video, but I appreciate you guys joining me. Till next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.